let's start with the title, intimaa. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Intimaa, yes, it's
Intimaa.
an Arabic word.
For belonging. Tell us about the
Yeah.
choice of that title.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's just, I think sometimes we have very deep reasons for choosing things, and sometimes it's more like, okay, we need a title. What is the closest title at hand? So I don't have some super deep existential. I mean, it's partially existential, but intimaa in Arabic means belonging, and so I just chose the title because I feel like I struggle with that concept, and I wanted an Arabic title. Also, I wanted to have an Arabic title, and so yeah, I mean, it means belonging, and again, that's something that I feel like I'm constantly struggling to find, whether it's culturally, conceptually within music, and so it just seemed like you know. A good title for an album that is very kind of searching still in the searching for belonging, and yeah, I mean, also with belonging, I feel like the more I think about it, the less it matters.
Well, and
Yeah.
you've had the kind of life that really raises the question of belonging. You've lived in multiple countries, as I understand it, born in Saudi Arabia, is that right?
Born in Saudi, which it's interesting. People think that because I'm born in Saudi, I'm from Saudi. I'm not from Saudi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wish I was, because I would be a lot richer. Uh, they don't just give you citizenship if you're born in Saudi Arabia. You have to be like, actually Saudi. So born in Saudi, yeah, but
And,
not Saudi.
and where have you lived?
So I was born in Saudi, then we moved to Canada briefly, back to Saudi. I've lived in Jordan, I've lived in Oman, and I've lived in Dubai, and I've lived in Nancy in France, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and now I'm in Montreal.
How are you enjoying Montreal?
It's cool, I survived the winter, survived the first winter,
No small thing.
um, which was insane. I've never experienced cold like this.
Mm.
Just next level psychedelic winter. Uh, but also, yeah, I moved here in the winter, which is a good time to move. I feel, to like establish a home.
Yeah.
My friends told me I was crazy to move here in the winter, but I was like, actually, that's the best time because there's no distractions and you're literally in your home, which is your frozen tomb. And what better time to set up shop?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Montreal winters are notorious. It is a lot of snow and a lot of very, very cold weather for extended periods of time. Was that an adjustment for you?
yes, definitely. I mean, I'm from the desert, but it's like I was born in a very extreme environment on one end of the spectrum, and now I am on the other extreme. Now I'm at the other extreme, so it's just I'm testing the breadth of my climate capacities.
In some respects, it's just a different kind of desert, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially, I look forward to hopefully next winter going out into like more kind of open environments and seeing just like open expanses of snow and see how that compares to the desert. I didn't have time to do that this year, but
Enjoy that.
yeah.
You've also been doing some research, I understand, into weaving and textiles. And is there a connection to that work with this new recording?
Yes, definitely. So in 2019, I was commissioned. I was living in Asheville, and I was commissioned to do a composition for the Black Mountain College Museum in Asheville, and they were doing an exhibition about the women of Black Mountain College, which that's a whole other topic. But I'm a big fan of Black Mountain College. For anybody who hasn't heard of it, I would highly suggest researching Black Mountain College and all of the pantheon of artists that emerged from that place. But So the topic was the women of Black Mountain College. So I ended up choosing Annie Albers, who was a weaver, the weaving instructor at Black Mountain College, who had come from the Bauhaus. And I started researching Annie Albers's work and her weavings and her textiles. And I started, because I was commissioned to compose a piece for a percussion quartet inspired by the women of Black Mountain. So I ended up choosing a weaver and using weaving drafts as my inspiration to start composing a rhythmic composition for percussion quartet. So that's kind of when the weaving obsession and research started happening. And it was a year-long period of research into weaving because I didn't know anything about weaving at the time. So I started interviewing weavers, I started learning how to weave, and I started studying drafts, which are these grids these kind of grids of black and white squares that represent the different components of weaving. So it's almost like a musical score, but for a weaver. And so eventually I was, kind of studying these drafts, and I eventually figured out a way to just kind of use them as sequences. So basically on and off sequences. So if you imagine like a grid with a bunch of scattered black and white squares, I ended up transposing that onto a sequencer that I had and using that as the basis for my rhythmic figures. And so that has, that year-long process of studying and researching weaving has kind of informed the way I think about music and structure. And I think like once you start getting into weaving, you notice structure in everything, not only the textiles around you, but it starts, at least for me, it it caused me to see and hear things in a different way, and really start thinking about kind of systems and sequences that apply to other to non-musical systems, and how to apply those. And so yes, weaving is a heavy influence in the album and in the way that I think about sound and structure, and structure really, how to structure cloth and how to structure sound in that same way.
Non-musical systems have been an important idea for you since you began to focus on electronic music. What's the origin of that interest? What led you to that?
I think weaving really opened up that type of thinking. Just to back up, I think modular synthesizers opened me up to different kinds of systems. I'm using that term kind of loosely because I know systems is a whole field of study, which I'm definitely interested in getting into. I haven't really started yet, but it does interest me. It's on my research roster. But just the idea of like the modular synthesizer being an alternative system to a traditional synthesizer, and then taking that one step further as like the system of weaving, the system of like vertical and horizontal grids, and how that can be applied to other things. And I'm just kind of trying to think of other ways that I can apply, or like other systems that could potentially be of interest to be translated into musical terms, or just conceptual terms, or thought processes, or maybe I also love spreadsheets. I don't know if that, like, I love gridded paper and spreadsheets and sequencers, and so that's something that is very appealing to me, and just how kind of structures can emerge out of systems. Which is like which that was kind of the breakthrough moment with the weaving project and translating it into rhythms. Once I started listening to these rhythmic sequences that were derived from this visual system, these kind of patterns emerged, and it was like, oh wow, okay, I wouldn't have thought that this is what this would sound like necessarily. And
so is there, there's an inspirational element, and perhaps even a process element to what you're describing, creating these systems and then leveraging that approach to the production of new music. That a fair description?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Again, I mean, not to be too heavy-handed with the weaving metaphors, but it's a very deep well of inspiration. But the idea of sourcing materials, and for me, like my fibers are my samples, which I spend a lot of time creating these. I mean, it's the equivalent of creating like a synthetic fiber. I don't, necessarily, maybe like in weaving, you have natural fibers and synthetic fibers. So maybe like hand spun wool would be a natural fiber, and then you have these kind of super tech, fibers. And so those are kind of, I think of my samples, like I have like field recorded samples, which would be the natural side of things. And then my samples that I've synthesized and worked on, and those would be the synthetic samples. Then I start with those, and then like the spinning is like the processing of the samples, and doing micro edits, and then kind of putting them into the sequencer, and then sequencing everything, which when you're weaving, like dressing a loom takes, like the first time I dressed a loom, like it took almost a full day. So just that mindset of like, before you even start weaving, you have to do all of this pre-work. And yeah, weavers are very patient people. I don't think people understand the level of patience it takes, and I have so much respect for weavers. I'm not a weaver, I'm just a student of weaving. But the weavers that I know are, I mean, it's it's a phenomenally labor intensive process. And so I try and approach my sequencers with that same mindset of like, setting things up in a very thought out way, to then have fun with it and sequence.
You began as a bassist. You played electric bass until 2014, I understand, before switching to modular synthesizers. What triggered that change?
I was playing bass in different bands in Los Angeles. I was a session musician and a touring musician, and I wasn't playing any of my own music. I was just kind of I was a hired gun, and at that time there was more and more demand to play key bass. I was playing in like R&B bands and a lot of hip hop at the time, and people just wanted bass players who could also play key bass. So I ended up getting a Moog Voyager, and that was my first synthesizer. And then I quickly realized that I was a lot more interested in that than playing bass, and it kind of opened up my thinking to like the expanded nature of sound beyond just playing songs. And I was very, very late to the electronic party. But I made it. Thank God I made it. And so I started getting more into synthesis, and then from the Voyager, I started getting more into sound design, and I ended up getting into modular synthesizers, and then I eventually kind of dropped bass completely in favor of a more kind of abstract and kind of DIY approach to sound. And that's just where I just wanted to go, and I just got swept into that world. And
I'm curious about that, because I think that the bass is a traditional instrument, even an electric one. It's a traditional instrument, lends itself to conventional styles of music where synthesizers are so much more open in terms of what you can do with them. And I think the more time you spend with them, there is this kind of gravitational pull toward less structured, less conventional forms of composition or improvisation or whatever it is you're interested in. Was that part of the transition that you experienced? By that I mean, did the instrument take you to a place that maybe was a bit of a surprise?
Uh, definitely. And I mean, I think just to think about the entire circle of it. I mean, I'm still in the cycle, but it took it took a destructuring to get hyperstructured. Then, like, once I got into sequencing, I definitely did not start with sequencers. I started with making drones and just exploring. I think like a lot of people who get into synthesizers, like, you kind of start with making drones, and you start by just kind of exploring like the timbral capacities of the synthesizer. And I mean, definitely um, that's kind of when I started to learn how to listen in a different way, and it became a much more personal process of working with sound, versus, again, just kind of playing songs and learning, kind of just learning songs by rote and learning parts. It was yeah, a very profound transformation.
Mm.
Um, and that definitely affected the way that uh, I mean, it affected more than just my life in music. It affected the way that I perceived kind of external structures in general. And I started thinking, else what else can be broken down into its component parts and restructured. So yeah, it's a very, very profound shift.
Mm. You strike me as quite an analytical person, that you're learning and seeking either explanations or just backstories of whatever's around you. That true?
Yes, I would say I'm pretty analytical. I mean, I wish I could turn that off more.
Mm.
I'm working on that. I'm definitely working on that. But it's I mean, these are all, again, systems that they're not isolated things necessarily. I think the headspace that I'm at with music definitely extends into my perception of my daily life, and the way that I try and kind of live. And I'm trying to integrate those two things more and more, and seeing them as like entire systems of being, instead of like, this is my musical self and this is my other self. It's all kind of uh, it's an entire system that is kind of circulating and feeding off of each other. And so I'm very happy that I got into modulars, and yeah, out of the musical industrial complex that I was stuck in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, the new album is just gorgeous. I think it is something really quite special. Um,
Yeah.
Tell us about the process. Were there surprises along the way? How do you feel about the finished product?
Um, Again, I don't want to give you some kind of made up answer to that, but also it's one of those things that I worked on it last year. So a lot of it, I don't know, it's like, like, I'm done with that project. It's over here now. So let me backtrack. How do I feel about it? I'm very grateful to Touch for putting out this weird music. Very, very, very grateful for their all of the back and forth, and their patience and input. And I am were there surprises? Uh, yeah, I mean, in the process of forming, there's always surprises. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that you kind of make it, you put it out, and it just has a life of its own. And I don't know, how it's going to be received, but I'm very kind of proud of this work and happy to put it out. And there's something about releasing work that is very necessary. I think we all have a lot of work sitting on hard drives that just kind of stagnates, and so I'm happy to put it out into the world, um, and I'm just excited about the processes that I was able to develop in making it, you know, and the little discoveries or big discoveries that I made in my own process while I was making it. And I took a lot of notes while I'm a very big note taker, so I took a lot of notes as I was making it. And maybe one day I will kind of make a little zine of notes, but it was a heavily documented process, which actually I wanted to review them before speaking with you today because I forget a lot, which is why I take notes. But I'm very, yeah, I'm stoked it's on vinyl. Hopefully that's not too terrible for the environment, but yeah.
No, it's one of my favorites of the year so far.
Wow,
A couple of projects listed on your website. Speaking of spreadsheets, the design of your website was a treat. I got such a kick out of that. Definitely encourage people to check out that. Modular on the Spot in LA and Beirut Synthesizer Center in Lebanon. Are those live performance projects, or what are those two? What are those two things?
Modular on the Spot is it's a picnic that a friend and I started in Los Angeles, I think in 2015 or something. It started as a generator party with our friends in LA who were playing modular synthesizers, and we just decided to kind of merge our love of the outdoors and, you know, playing synthesizers into one kind of free outdoor, super low key event. And it became very popular over the years. And like popular things, sometimes they can expand too much and then the spirit dies. I don't want to be too negative about it, but I mean, it's definitely something that's spread to many different cities and countries since. But its kind of inception was just a generator party to be outside with friends and just kind of consider, you know, what would a synthesizer sound in the ecology of a natural environment. And in our case, it was on the banks of the LA River, which was a beautiful, beautiful spot that I found, and it was right at the bottom of the bank, and it was like at the bottom of a concrete embankment. Beautiful, like natural reverb from this, you know, angled concrete, and it was a really special time. And it's kind of turned into something else now, and it's a meme. Also, now there's these memes that say that they have a photo of Modular the Spot, and it says, if you see this in your neighborhood, your rent has gone up, and that's probably true now. You know, not intentional, but you know. And the Beirut Synthesizer Center is a space that I founded with three friends, Elise Tabet, Ziad Mukarzel, and Hani Manja in Beirut. We started it in 2020, and it's a kind of an informal co-op for electronic music. Kind of difficult to define because a lot of different things happen in that space, but it's kind of like a community space for electronic music freaks, and plus, you know, for like whatever, you know, just like any kind of freak who's like looking for a spot to work and has a project. Yeah, it's also taken a life of its own and grown beyond what we initially planned.
So places to belong.
Places to belong, yes. Well put. I'm gonna write that one down. See, note taker. My special pen. Yes. Places to belong. I will quote you on that. Yes. Yeah, places to belong. Whether, you know, and you know, internally and externally. With Modular on the Spot, I remember when I would play, or, you know, it was a very different experience than playing in a club or playing at a venue, you know, just to kind of arrive in a space and connect with the natural surroundings and, you know, build a patch or, you know, build your sounds based on the input that you're receiving, and kind of exploring how you belong in a space, how your instrument belongs, how the sounds you're creating belong in a space, versus just showing up and like enforcing your, you know, sound on a environment. And that's true of both spaces, of Madra on the Spot and of Period Synthesizer Center. And with the Beirut Synthesizer Center, I mean, that's just something that, you know, in general, that's something that tends to be lacking in a lot of cities, you know, places to meet other people and work on your own projects. And it's very complex, you know. Also, community is very complex, and it's not just like, oh, we're going to open a community space and it's going to be great. It's like there's so much nuance that goes into creating places to belong, and it's something that takes kind of continuous reevaluation and refinement, and but it's something worth, you know, trying again and again and again, as we also continuously change, hopefully.